Hello, my name is Patrick Usher and I'm an ME-CFS patient. Now I'm sure you've heard of the idea of adrenal fatigue, and you might have heard of the idea also of HPA axis dysregulation, which might negatively affect the output of the adrenal glands. But have you heard of the idea of adrenal shrinkage, or the idea that the adrenal glands in ME-CFS and related illnesses might actually become up to 50% smaller than they should be? No, I imagine that you haven't, and I hadn't either. And in this video, we're going to talk all about it. First, however, if you are new to this channel, this is a place where I aim to simplify the research into ME-CFS and related illnesses. I believe that illnesses like ME-CFS and Long Covid are not that mysterious. If you actually put all of the research out in front of you, you can really see what are the key mechanisms that drive these conditions. So if you want to learn more about research into these illnesses in an accessible way, please like and subscribe. The research that I'm talking about actually comes from quite a long time ago, all the way back in 1999. And I think this study was really interesting, and I'm very surprised that the findings in this study are generally not known, and that no one has really taken them up to re-examine them today and to see exactly how prevalent this problem is, or to develop clear treatment guidelines based on this issue. So the study in question was by Scott et al., and it was called Small Adrenal Glands in Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, a Preliminary Computer Tomography Study, and it was conducted between Dublin and London. And the basis for this study was the observation that in ME-CFS patients, there often exists a hypocortical state. Now that means a slight reduction, or it could be more than slight reduction, in the output of cortisol. And in particular, the authors who were involved in this paper had previously done some work in this regard. They had, for example, taken 24-hour urinary cortisol measures, found them to be noticeably lower than they should be. They had also done what is known as the ACTH stimulation test. ACTH will stimulate the adrenal glands to release cortisol, and what they noted was that ME-CFS patients often did not produce enough cortisol in response to this test. And so what they wanted to know is there something going on in the adrenal glands themselves that can explain this lowered output of cortisol? This is a very interesting question, because nowadays, for example, when you look on the YouTube sphere, or even people who talk about, even researchers who talk about this issue, they often say it's probably just a brain HPA axis regulation issue. There's not something actually going on in the adrenal glands themselves. But this study shows us that there could well be something going on, and something very serious. So without much further ado, let's get straight into the results of this study. So they did a scan of the adrenal glands of 8 ME-CFS patients. All of those 8 patients had been found to have this lowered cortisol output, the problems with ACTH stimulation. There were also measurements taken of a significant number of healthy controls. This is what they found. Okay, so brace yourself. The maximum width of the right adrenal gland was 0.61 centimeters in the healthy comparison group and only 0.3 centimeters in the ME-CFS patients. The maximum width of the left adrenal gland was 0.79 centimeters in the healthy comparison group and 0.36 centimeters in the CFS group. Mean reductions in excess of 50% are found in both the right and left adrenal gland bodies in ME-CFS. Now this is an extraordinary finding. I mean, just imagine for a moment if you had an illness that caused your brain to shrink by 50%, or if you had an illness which caused your heart or your liver to shrink by 50%. Now I think that would be headline news, and I think it would be considered very serious. In fact, I would also wager a guess that if you did have an illness that shrunk those organs, particularly the heart and the brain, by that much, I'm not sure you'd still be around to experience life. But the point is, this is evidently a very significant finding, and yet who knows about this? Really, it's not talked about. All right, let's continue with the study. So the authors say ME-CFS subjects whom on the basis of an adrenal stimulation test had evidence of subtle underfunctioning of this gland have been shown in this study to have adrenal gland bodies over 50% smaller than a comparison group of healthy subjects. It is conceivable that a reduction in adrenal gland volume associated with atrophy of adrenocortical tissue may result in a lowering of cortisol stores and cortisol synthesis capacity, and also that of the adrenal androgens. This would explain the trend for lower 24-hour urinary free cortisol levels in subjects with ME-CFS, and also the blunted response to exogenous stimulation with 1 microgram ACTH compared to a healthy volunteer group. Now, very interesting, also continues, this isn't just about cortisol, that basal and stimulated DHEA is lower in patients with ME-CFS is consistent with this theory. ACTH is the primary stimulant of both the adrenal androgens and cortisol. So in this case, we have also a potential explanation for why we also tend to see low DHEA levels in ME-CFS patients. And right now I'm just showing you a diagram which represents the adrenal gland measurements in centimeters between the healthy comparison group on the left and the ME-CFS group on the right, where you see a dramatic reduction in the size of the adrenals. Now, there are two other points that I want to make that are important in relation to the findings of this study. The first, of course, is why is this happening? I mean, again, it's very strange. And the reason proposed by the authors of this paper is that the adrenal glands are actually atrophying because of a problem in the HPA axis. So when there's this HPA axis dysregulation, there can be a lowering of ACTH, and ACTH actually acts as a stimulus of growth for the adrenal glands. So let's say you have this autonomic dysfunction, you have this dysautonomia, there is therefore a dysregulation of the various substances, chemical messengers and so on that are being produced there, and because of that there's a lowering of ACTH, and over time therefore there is a lowering of the size of the adrenal glands. Furthermore, this becomes a vicious cycle, because once you have smaller adrenal glands, they're less capable of producing the amount of cortisol you need anyway. And the authors of this paper also point out that this will then create various further feedback loops that may additionally lower ACTH and therefore inhibit even more the growth of the adrenal glands. A second really interesting point that the authors of this paper made was that the finding of small adrenal glands differentiates ME-CFS from depression, because in depression, the opposite is actually what has been found, that the adrenal glands grow. So given that ME-CFS patients are often accused of being just depressed, which is not in any way to belittle real deal depression, this is a very good example of a biomedical finding that actually contradicts that. So considering this study in the round, what are the really important takeaways? Well, first of all, it's another example of a serious biomedical abnormality within ME-CFS. I believe that this really needs to be taken up again in current research. This study only looked at 8 patients. We need to take many more patients and study the size of their adrenal glands. How common is this problem? Is it actually widespread, or does it affect a subset? Is that subset more severely ill than the others? And given that ME-CFS is very similar, if not the same in many cases as long COVID, this problem may have risen exponentially. And given that there's so much drive to understand long COVID, not as much as there should be, but certainly more attention than ME-CFS has ever received, this is also something that really needs to be grappled with and understood to see if it's a problem. And the real reason for that is not just that it helps us to understand these conditions, and it helps us to further establish the biomedical nature of these illnesses, which is so important in counteracting mainstream medical as well as societal ignorance. I mean, imagine the headlines: long COVID patients found to have adrenal glands 50% smaller than normal. That's significant. No one can psychosomatize their way into that. But it's also about treatments, because it seems commonsensical to me that if someone has ended up in this particular situation, where it's not just a dysregulated nervous system that's causing a lowering of output of adrenal hormones, but actually the adrenal glands themselves have shrunk and are therefore also less capable of releasing the hormones they need, I think that's medically very serious. And I think it's very hard in that case, even though it's theoretically conceivable, as with many things, that the body could rebuild the size of the adrenal glands under the right circumstances. It's the body in such a circumstance has far less resources to actually do that. And I think there is therefore an argument in such a case to actually know what kind of treatment someone might need for a period of time in order to support their body, to improve its functioning, and then hopefully help the adrenal glands rebuild and therefore be able to resume their more normal, healthy functioning. Now, I'm no expert on the adrenal glands, but it strikes me that this kind of issue might respond to low-dose cortisol. I know that some ME-CFS patients do very well with this, and I'm only talking about very low doses, not anything that might suppress the adrenal glands. I've not tried that myself. I know some people take DHEA. I have taken DHEA as well because I had very low DHEA levels. Another option I know is people talk about taking pregnenolone, which is the precursor hormone for the adrenal hormones. Something I'd love to try myself at some point, although I haven't yet. Sometimes people talk about things like licorice root, which helps to prevent the degradation of the adrenal hormones. But really, this needs to be taken into the hands of medical experts. Now, in 2024, we need updated studies on this very strange phenomenon, which would clearly cause a significant physiological burden on anyone's body. Right, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. Please leave your comments down below. What do you think of this study? What's your reaction to it? What do you think about treatment options? What have you found helpful in terms of supplements or medications for adrenal issues? Also down below you will find a link to a free download of a medical hypothesis that I have written on the causes of excessive thirst in ME-CFS, POTS and Long Covid, as well as details about a consultation service I offer in which people can pick my brains on aspects of ME-CFS research, as well as various treatments that I am more familiar with myself. So that's it for this video, and I look forward to engaging with you, and I'll see you next time.